Tory MPs are threatening to rebel against the government's £30 a week cut to employment and support allowance. It's due to come into effect next April. Unhappy with the impact it will have on the sick and disabled, there are reportedly tens of Conservative backbenchers seeking amendments. Well, many of those now opposed voted in favour of the cut earlier this year. Back then, the government took advantage of what's known as financial privilege, a controversial power which overturns any legislation defeated in the House of Lords. Currently, the Tory rebels are joining forces with SNP MPs to push for a Commons debate on delaying the cut until help can be made available to those who will be affected. Well, it seems that those in need may also be stretched a little further. Research by the Chartered Institute of Housing warns a reduced cap on benefits to be introduced next week will drive up poverty and homelessness, with children being hit particularly hard. Well, the cap's being slashed to £23,000 a year for residents in London and £20,000 for those outside. That's down from £26,000. Suffering the hardest blow will be the 116,000 families with between 1 and 4 children. That's an increase of almost 100,000 on the 20,000 already affected. The number of children in those families hits almost 320,000. Those households are set to lose £115 a week. Couples on benefits that have 3 children will now receive £50.80 a week towards their housing costs, which is significantly lower than the average cost of renting a 3-bedroom property. Well, joining me now to discuss all of that is crossbench peer Baroness Meacher. Baroness, thanks for coming into the studio this evening. So how is this cut to employment and support allowance supposed to incentivise people into work?
The idea is that these disabled people are just lazy. And you have to assume, the government must assume such a thing. Well, we know, don't we, that disabled people are very, very keen to be normalised, if you like, lead a normal life. More than almost anyone else, they want to get into work. But of course there are huge barriers for them. Employers, I can actually understand why employers think, well, I've got a perfectly able-bodied person here and I've got a disabled person. Well, life's going to be a bit simpler if I take the able-bodied one. And this happens all the time. So what the government are doing is to cut £30 a week, pretty much, short a few pennies, of the employment support allowance for disabled people, £30 a week, taking their income down to £73 a week, apart from some help with housing, as you've already mentioned. But of course, the housing benefit is not going to cover all their rent. The council tax benefit is not going to cover all their council tax. So they've got this £30 drop in their income to this incredibly low sum, which is designed for people who really are able-bodied and have no restrictions on getting into work. But these people have huge restrictions. They could be on this benefit for a long time. The benefit, you cannot live off it, in my view. You can't. Maybe you can do it for a week. Well, I don't think I could.
I want to just play you a clip of something that Theresa May said on benefits recently at the Conservative conference. Let's hear it.
If we act to correct unfairness and injustice and put government at the service of ordinary working people, we can build that new united Britain in which everyone plays by the same rules and in which the powerful and the privileged no longer ignore the interests of the people. Only we can do it.
It's moving stuff, isn't it? Is the Chartered Institute of Housing correct in saying that she's breaking her promises now?
Well, I think it's perfectly obvious, isn't it? If you cut £100 or more a week of low-income families' incomes, this is not looking after people who are working, who are trying hard, the sort of people that Theresa May was talking about. I think Theresa May, I was very excited by Theresa May's speech. I remember outside Downing Street when she took over, I thought, oh, wow, this is going to be really good, this is going to be different. But I'm afraid the reality, the actions just don't match the words at all.
I just want to ask you one more question very, very briefly. What do you think is behind the Tory MPs' change of heart on this legislation?
The MPs who are rebelling, I think they must be getting constituents coming into their surgery saying, do you realise what you're doing? Do you realise what your government is doing? Do you realise that I've got to live off £73 a week and pay a bit of my rent out of that and a bit of... And these MPs are thinking, my God, well, I couldn't do that. So I think it's just a reality check and they just know that this is going to bring huge unpopularity to their government, so they want to act before they fall, if you like.
Baroness Mitchell, thank you very much for coming in. Pleasure.
Last week, Mr. Speaker, the autumn statement revealed the abject failure of this government's economic strategy. Economic growth was revised down, wage growth was revised down, business investment was revised down, borrowing and debt revised up yet again. Surely now the Prime Minister accepts her predecessor's long-term economic plan was actually a failure.
Prime Minister!
I'll give the right honourable gentleman some facts. The IMF says that this will be the fastest growing advanced economy in the world this year. Unemployment is down. We have record numbers of people in employment, and we have companies like Nissan, Jaguar Land Rover, Honda, Arm, Google, Facebook, Apple investing in the UK, securing jobs here in the United Kingdom. That's what a good economic plan does.
They did tell us that the deficit would be eradicated by 2015. This was then advanced to 2020, and now it's been advanced to whenever in the future. But since she quotes the Institute of Fiscal Studies, I think she's been a little bit selective, because they also went on to say that the prospect for workers over the next 6 years was, and I quote, dreadful, and went on to say, creating, and I quote, the worst decade for living standards since the last war, and probably since the 1920s. Isn't it fair to say that those just getting by are suffering all the pain for no gain?
Prime Minister!
I have to say to the right honourable gentleman, I think given that he can't differentiate between the IMF and the IFS, it's probably a good job he's sitting there and I'm standing here. Let me tell him what we are doing for those people, and let's think about those people who do find life difficult, who are struggling to get by, who have a job but worry about their job security, who have a home but worry about paying the mortgage and are worried about their children's education and whether their children will be able to buy a home. What are the measures we've been doing? We've increased the national living wage. We introduced the national living wage. We're increasing personal tax allowance, taking more people out of paying tax altogether. We're increasing the number of affordable homes being built. But we can only do this if we have a strong economy, and it's our plan that delivers that strong economy.
Mr. Speaker, wages have stagnated, home ownership is falling, homelessness has doubled, and queues at food banks are rising every day. If the Prime Minister really believes the economy is doing well, why is her government forcing through £2 billion of cuts in in-work support, cutting the incomes of working people, leaving many households over £2,000 per year worse off?
He starts his question by talking about home ownership. Let's be very clear what's happening in terms of housing. House building starts fell by 45% under Labour in 12 years. They have increased by over 2/3 since the Conservatives were in government. Yes, we are making changes to the welfare system. He and I have a fundamental difference of opinion about the welfare system. I think what is important in the welfare system is that we remember those who are benefiting from it and we remember those who are paying for it. The universal credit system is there to ensure that people, that work will always pay for people. I believe in a welfare system that does help people to get into work, that does encourage people into the workplace. He believes in a welfare system where people are able to live on benefits.
Speaker, the last Labour government took 800,000 children out of poverty. Under her government, child poverty is rising and now covers 4 million children across this country. Our people are suffering because of the policies of her government. People are paying the price for her failed economic experiment. They've even now abandoned the previous Chancellor's pledge for their so-called national living wage, paying at least £9 per hour by 2020. What is the new pledge on living wage?
Prime Minister.
The pledge on living wage is what's set out in the autumn statement and is as it always has been. But he talks about poverty. He talks about poverty. Actually, we are seeing fewer families in absolute poverty and fewer families in relative poverty. And I come back to the point I've been making in answer to his previous questions. It is only possible to do these things by having a strong economy. The one thing we know is that the policy that would not deliver a strong economy is Labour's policy to increase borrowing by £500 billion. Increase borrowing by £500 billion. He talks about the impact of people in work. Let me remind him what the former shadow Treasury Minister said. Labour's policy to increase borrowing would lead to double the income tax, double council tax, double VAT and double national insurance. That won't help anybody who's in the workplace and just about managing.
Entirely sure where the government's credibility lies on borrowing, since they're borrowing even more. The deficit is increasing and people are suffering. When she talks about children in poverty in response to my question, I simply remind her 4 million children living in poverty, children going hungry to school in this country because their parents don't have enough money to feed them properly. It is a disgrace and should be addressed. Mr. Speaker, in the autumn statement last week, the Chancellor spoke for over 50 minutes. During that time, he didn't once mention the National Health Service or social care. 1.2 million people are lacking the care they need. Why was there not one single penny more for social care in the autumn statement?
Prime Minister.
There is absolutely no doubt that the social care system is under pressure. We recognise that. If you just look at the fact that there are 1 million more people aged over 65 today than there were in 2010, we see the sort of pressures on the social care system. But that's why the government has already acted to put more money into the social care system. More money through the Better Care Fund, 3.5 billion extra through the Better Care Fund, and more money through the social care precept. But it's also important that local authorities and the NHS work together to ensure, for example, that people have the social care they need so they're not ending up blocking beds in hospital. There's some very good practice up and down the country, and sadly there's some not so good practice. What we need to do is make sure everybody is giving the best possible service to people who need it.
Jeremy Corbyn.
There's a tragic parallel going on between an underfunded NHS and an underfunded social care system all over the country. And she knows it, and indeed she might care to listen to the Tory leader of Warwickshire Council, Izzy Seacombe, who says that her council has been cut to the bone and says on social care, right now we have a 1.3 billion gap which is not being funded. It is a real crisis in every social services department all over the country, and indeed in almost every NHS hospital. Next year, Mr. Speaker, this government is handing back £605 million in corporation tax cuts, rising to 1.6 billion the year after that, and 7.5 billion over the next 5 years. So could the Prime Minister explain to the more than 1 million elderly people not getting the care they need, to the 4 million on NHS waiting lists, to the millions of pensioners worried about losing the protection of the triple lock, why there is not one penny extra for the NHS or social care? Just what is this government's real sense of priorities?
Prime Minister.
The Right Honourable Gentleman talks about funding social care and funding the National Health Service. £3.8 billion extra is going into the National Health Service this year. Under Labour's plans, Under Labour's plans, we would have seen 1.3 billion less going into the National Health Service. Social care funding is going up under this government. At the last election, the Shadow Chancellor, lately of Strictly fame, said local authorities would get not a penny more. Conservatives putting money into the NHS and social care, Labour would deny it.
The highest paid CEO in Britain will earn the annual average salary in just 45 minutes, according to new research, pocketing more than 2,500 times the average salary in 1 year. The eye-watering research by the TUC comes with a call on Theresa May to address pay inequality at a time when millions are living in poverty. And as RTEK's Harry Fear now reports, those with the least could wind up on even less, with austerity 3.0 on the cards.
It's almost a year and a half since the Conservative Party won majority government. Let's recap the prediction of the time.
So what does the future hold under a Conservative government? Opponents say it means another 5 years of even tougher austerity.
So were those fears right? Apparently so.
They broke in and stole most of our food. There's a disused door on the other side and they took it off its hinges.
We know charities are handing out food aid more and more, in excess of 1 million times in 12 months. But this food bank is one of a number to have been robbed in recent years. It's feared by the most desperate.
I can't look into the mind of the people who did it, but we want to pray for them and we hope that the food is well used.
So who uses this food bank by the front door?
You know, you can be on a 0 hours contract, you're paying a lot of money just to even have 1 bedroom in this area just to work from. And we've had people in suits because they're just suddenly it's all fallen apart for them and they're going, I need to get food for the kids.
And many others here are apparently caught out by austerity-era benefits sanctions, like Lucy.
When the Conservatives got in, it was all, you know, it was going to be about working families, we were all in it together. We've had cut. We've not seen any benefits from that at all.
Lucy's family of 4, her 2 kids and partner, have faced 3 sets of effective benefit adjustments.
It was a year ago, sort of this month, we had a really big cut to our tax credits. We were sort of originally, we were on, I think it was about £200 a week, and they cut it by £140. And what do you do in that situation? That's the only money that we had to live on because, you know, all our wages going on rent and bills. But then again this year we've had another, I still can't get my head around it. We've had another cut to our tax credits. So now 4 of us are living on less than £100 a week. And I didn't even think that was legal, you know.
But those cuts were meant to have been held back. Remember the historic U-turn?
I've listened to the concerns, I hear and understand them. The simplest thing to do is not to phase these changes in, but to avoid them altogether. Tax credits are being phased out anyway as we introduce universal credit.
Research suggests benefit sanctions have led claimants to turn to suicide, others to crime to feed themselves. Meanwhile, more and more families, over 1 million, are reportedly at relationship breaking point as economic strains increase.
How on earth can GDP be growing and 1 million people are dependent on food aid? It's not being responded to like a crisis. And that's, I think, the most scary thing for all of those people who are suffering the impacts right now.
But the price that's been paid for austerity, more in-work poverty, inequality, homelessness, perhaps it's been worth it if we are at least balancing the books as promised. Well, even that, some argue, has demonstrably failed.
If you try and cut in an economic downturn, what you're going to end up with is a smaller economy with lower tax receipts, you know, depressed productivity, and that will make it more difficult to pay down the national debt. That is what has essentially happened since 2010.
For others, the harsh means of austerity used are dangerously counterproductive in the long run.
The figures are scary. You've got an economy that is the 5th, maybe 6th biggest in the world. And we are essentially, by 2020, will condemn about 2.4 million children to living in absolute poverty. That doesn't make sense in terms of growth and your future. So if those children are going to be the workforce of the future, if they start off malnourished, if they start off with poor housing, with damp conditions, with health issues, we're building an economy that won't work for the future.
Reporting for RT UK, I'm Harry Fear.